Hello and welcome to Quality Policing. I am Peter Moskos, and I'm going a bit off subject today because I am honored to have my first, and perhaps only, but you never know, first and perhaps first of many mayoral candidates running for the mayor of the city of New York. I am here today with Whitney Tilson, who has graciously given me the time to come to talk to him about issues in general, and of course, policing and criminal justice issues in particular. Thanks for coming on, Whitney.
My pleasure, Peter. Thanks for having me.
So, in my book, Back from the Brink, I start every interview by asking people, what did your parents do? It's very Studs Terkel-like. I just want to fill out the picture. No one comes from a vacuum. I should say my mother was a high school teacher and my father was a professor at Northwestern University.
Well, we actually come from somewhat similar backgrounds then. Both my parents were teachers who met and married in the Peace Corps during Peace Corps training in 1962 in San Francisco and then Hawaii, and were stationed in the Philippines. My dad hadn't even finished college yet. My mom had just graduated from college. She's a year older, and they had to get married quickly, because otherwise they would have been placed in separate islands and probably never seen each other again. And so my dad proposed. They got married at the Manila Hotel with exactly one family member combined from both their families who flew over. My grandmother, my dad's mother flew over, and they are still going strong at age 83 and 84 now. By the time I was born in 1966, they had left the Peace Corps, were teaching in New Haven, Connecticut, actually the day I was born, where my dad is from. But at age 2, we moved back overseas. My parents have worked in international development, educational projects for most of their careers. And so I grew up in Tanzania for 3 years. The first school I ever attended was in Morogoro, Tanzania. I was the only white kid in a classroom with Tanzanian farmers' children. Also spent 3 years in Nicaragua in sort of middle of elementary school. And my parents have actually retired. They've spent the last 30 years in Ethiopia, now retired in Kenya. So I still have quite a few ties to East Africa.
Those are two of the 3 countries I've been to in sub-Saharan Africa, Kenya and Ethiopia.
I hope you enjoyed them.
Yeah, though I have to say my favorite was Rwanda.
We did a family trip to Rwanda, and I would recommend Tanzania and Kenya, maybe a joint trip there. South Africa is magnificent if you haven't been there, but Rwanda I'd place pretty high third if you're going to go to Africa. Botswana was incredible as well.
I do need to get down there more because I have friends in Rwanda, police officer friends, or now retired. But anyway, so after a international, let's say, upbringing, you became a hedge fund manager. Is that correct? I don't.
Well, there were quite a few things in between, but my first job out of college, actually, I was at Harvard undergrad. I was employee number 2, helping Wendy Kopp start Teach for America. Mm-hmm. And that re-engaged me in the education world, and it really opened my eyes to the tremendous systemic educational inequalities in this country, something I've been passionately trying to address in the 36 years now since then. I then went back to Boston for a couple years of work, went to Harvard Business School, spent 5 years running a nonprofit organization. I started with one of Harvard Business School's best-known professors, Michael Porter, called the Initiative for a Competitive Inner City, researching and then actually working with and helping small inner-city minority-owned businesses in places like Harlem and the South Bronx and other places like that around the country grow. We raised an investment fund that's still going strong to this day, that's invested $1.7 billion in those kind of funds. And it was only then 5 years after business school and running this nonprofit organization that I made the very unusual pivot to launching my own little hedge fund with $1 million under management from friends and family in 1999. And did that for 18 years while still being super involved in many different charitable organizations, KIPP charter schools, the one I probably spent the most time on, been very, very involved in supporting charter schools, particularly in New York City, but nationwide.
We almost overlapped at Harvard. I started grad school there in 95. And in 1999, I became a Baltimore City police officer while in grad school.
Gotcha.
So,
Which grad school did you go to?
sociology, GSAS.
Oh, okay.
I got my PhD in 2004. But maybe had I become your partner in 99,
How many of your classmates became police officers?
Zero. And
I would
so let's see,
expect.
let me look up in the past, zero, and since then also zero.
Yes, I am not sure even one of my 800 classmates at Harvard Business School went and ran a nonprofit organization for 5 years after graduating. I remember when I came back, they did a survey of the class, and my combined earnings in the first 5 years after Harvard Business School, I was the left-hand data point on the curve.
It's interesting. In Baltimore, there was another PhD student who was also a cop, Cynthia alum, who's become a more prominent criminologist than I'll ever be. But it was kind of interesting that I wasn't the only PhD student Baltimore City cop, but I was certainly the only Baltimore City cop in Harvard.
So tell me, I'm a huge fan of The Wire. I think The Wire, The Sopranos, first 2 seasons of Homeland are the 3 best television series of all time. How accurate is The Wire?
I would say 75 to 80% accurate. It's not 100% accurate, but it's not trying to be 100% accurate. The parts that matter are very accurate. It's certainly... So it started filming when I left in 2001, and I didn't finish I moved to New York in 2002 and didn't finish my PhD my dissertation till 2004. So The Wire very much kept me spiritually attached to Baltimore City while I was gone, and I also had to make a conscious effort. I mean, it wasn't that hard, but I had to make sure I didn't accidentally include anything from The Wire in my dissertation or book, because I was afraid that somehow the memory would tie together, because that would just be, that would be a fatal flaw for a qualitative ethnographic research. They go, wait, that scene's from The Wire, and I'd go, oops, oh yeah, it was, my bad. That did not happen. But that's how realistic it was, that I really felt.
Yeah.
And it was filmed on the street side police, so I could recognize intersections and so on.
Right.
And David Simons, he's a mensch. He's been very good to me. He nicely, thoughtfully blurbed my new book, Back from the Brink, about the crime drop in New York City. So I'm pro Wire.
Yeah, I know teachers, Teach for America teachers who taught in the schools in Baltimore. And I believe it was season 3 of The Wire primarily took place in the schools there. And they said it was traumatizing for them. It was so realistic. The violence in the schools, the way the system just failed children so badly. It was. I can imagine there were parts where you felt similarly watching that show.
Yeah, and that's maybe a good segue into sort of the criminal justice subject. But one of people asked me, was I surprised going to Baltimore? What surprised me about being there? And I come from a very upper middle class background, born in Chicago and grew up in Evanston, Illinois. And as I said, both my parents were teachers. I graduated from Evanston High School in 1989 with very fond memories. It was a great high school. Baltimore was my introduction to working class America. I had never really met pickup truck driving, God-fearing Republicans in the flesh, because I did come from a super sort of liberal and progressive area, and then went to Princeton and Harvard, and so that was new for me. And I have to say, they embraced me far more than my Harvard colleagues would embrace them. They had far more tolerance to me as the weirdo lefty Harvard student. I was only a cop until I got civil service protection. It was 20 months total. I joke I did 20 and out, but it was months and not years. But they still, they were good to me. But so that was, new to me. And Baltimore, is a unique city, somewhat caught in time. And this was just at the verge of the internet. So it was weird to go into a place pretty blind. I just didn't know, you couldn't research it online and see, what's going on there.
How did you end up a Baltimore cop as opposed to, I don't know, a Philadelphia cop or a New York cop or a DC cop?
Because I wasn't
Boston
planning on becoming a cop. It was originally I was just going to do what's called participant observation research, basically just be a fly on the wall. And Boston said no. New York wouldn't return my phone calls. And through connections, through Greek American connections, 2 cities said yes. Knoxville, Tennessee, where my uncle had been the editor of the newspaper, and Baltimore, where my father knew a political operative who knew one of the assistant commissioners. But the commissioner who approved my research, kind of as, favor, he went off to work in the Clinton administration, and when I got there, he had just departed. And so there was an acting commissioner who looked over this project, somehow came across his desk the first day I was in the police academy, and he said, "This is crazy." He was probably right, and called, and I asked if I could have a meeting. I didn't realize how unusual it was for a non-hired police academy trainee to go into the police commissioner's office for a meeting. But he basically, he said, "Why don't you become a cop?" Long story short, he said, "Why don't you become a cop for real? Because this is not going to happen." And I said, "Well, who's going to hire me, knowing I'm going to quit after a year and write a book about it?" And he said, "If you can get hired, I will." And ultimately, I think he had, this is where, when I'm talking about they were nicer to me than Harvard people are to them, I said, "Look, if I go back, I failed. Like, I've moved here. I don't have a place to live." I probably could have managed some other dissertation, but it would have been awkward, and it would not have been a good dissertation. And I think he just had sympathy on me. He's like, this kid has potential, and I don't want to be responsible for him getting kicked out of Harvard. And so he quickly was retired, and a new commissioner, Ed Norris, came on, and I was sort of lost in the shuffle after that. But yeah, I went through the hiring process while I was in the academy, which has never been done before or since. And I mean, thank God I did that, because my original research plan wasn't that good, and I've, wasn't there for long, but I have, in essence, banked my career on that time. And cops say, they know I wasn't a cop for long, but at least I walked a mile in their shoes, and it did give you, gives you a certain perspective.
I remember one of the most memorable nights of my entire life was back when I was running the Initiative for Competitive Intercity, and I wanted a friend of mine who was an ADA here in Manhattan arranged for me to do a drive along. It was probably 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. and it put me up in Washington Heights, and they put me in a bulletproof vest. We drove, and I was in the back of a squad car, and I just accompanied 2 officers. And as we pulled away from the curb, the driver turned to me and said, there are 2 police officers, of course, no one had a driver, but the guy driving the car said, "Welcome to the drug capital of the world." And this is 25 years ago in Washington Heights, and he was right. Absolutely fascinating.
And some of them would drive down. So this is in 2000.
This would have been 90. I'm trying to think. I'm going to guess it was 1998.
Okay, yeah, because we had our drugs in East Baltimore were delivered from Washington Heights. New York tags would come down, and do their business. One
of the more interesting comments after he had pulled over, they weren't aggressive in a negative way, but they were proactive as they drove around. So if a car was parked in front of a fire hydrant, they would stop. That gives them an excuse to go up, and if a car had a broken taillight or headlight. And over the course of the evening, they probably stopped, or in the case of in front of a fire hydrant, the car was already parked and stopped, but went up and interacted with, in almost all cases, young minority men. And they were, in at least half the cases, quite rude, disrespectful. And I said, "Well, you understand, of course, they feel like you're racially profiling them." And he laughed and he said, "Yes, I know they think that, but in reality, I would be much more likely to stop somebody like you who looks like you, because there are plenty of legitimate reasons why a minority Latino or African-American man, a young person would be driving around Washington Heights. at midnight on a Saturday night. But he says there's only one reason a guy like you, Whitney, is driving around Washington Heights at midnight on a Saturday night, i.e. soliciting drugs. So he basically admitted that he would racially profile me over them. But of course, there weren't very many people like me. He didn't end up stopping many people like me.
Well, I mean, I wrote about this in my first book, Cop in the Hood, that, I used to racial profile against white people as well. Because I worked the midnight shift in a neighborhood that was 99% African American, generally they stood out like sore thumbs. And I mean, I always thought this neighborhood has enough problems without you coming in and making it worse. Go buy your drugs in Dundalk, or, which is it's a Baltimore reference, but wherever you're from. But it was pretty obvious when you had drug addicts coming in, because the heroin was cheaper and better where I policed. And I would also use pretextual stops. Yeah. Every cop had them. And it's important, and I appreciate the fact. And so I first heard you at the Vital City public safety debate when you said a lot of things that made a lot of sense. And
that caused the other candidates and people in the audience to spit up their coffee.
Well, and these are important issues because I think the anti-policing crowd and police abolitionists keep trying to move the Overton window over, where we're not even allowed to talk about where they just simply label good policing as unconstitutional policing or racist policing and that, I mean, their goal is to end policing by and large, or at least policing as we know it, or at least most of it. And it's important to push back on things like that. But a pretextual car stop, I kind of imagine that the people listening to this already know what it is. But it is when you use a legal reason to stop somebody based on reasonable suspicion or a traffic violation. It's like,
yes.
Because you want to stop that person. It is not so much that you care about the violation. A smart cop can indeed find a pretextual reason to stop almost everybody. That bothers some people, and certainly I could see the potential for abuse, but the truth is the cops that abuse that tend to not be smart enough or care enough to even use pretextual reasons, even if they have them and they just can make illegal stops. You do have to be a little bit of a thinking cop to figure out how to do things the right way. It's not that hard.
Yes.
But I used to stop people for not stopping at the line where the stop sign was. Mm-hmm. It was, in essence,
or 98% stopping, but a little bit of rolling, and before they
when I was following them, they would be so careful to follow every traffic. I'm, following them in a marked police car in East Baltimore at 3 a.m. at a drug corner. So it was kind of funny to see. I had one guy actually stick his hand out of the car and use hand signals to turn. And I pulled up and I let him go, and I said that I have to let you go because my father used to do that just to embarrass me. And I say, Papa, stop sticking your hand out of the window. I believe it's legal, though. I believe it actually is a legitimate way to signal and turn. Maybe it's changed. So that one I let go. But the point was, and this was before they had bought drugs. So I wasn't even making a drug arrest. I would give them a ticket for the violation, but I just tell them, look, you are here to buy drugs. You know that, and I know that. Usually they admit it, which, I don't know, kind of makes the cop feel happy. And I say, you can't, no, I'm the sheriff here. You can't buy drugs here. And then if they would come back, then I would try and find a reason to arrest them. But it was simply about policing the neighborhood, because I in my mind, I thought if I lived here and had to go to work in the morning, and even in a neighborhood as troubled, let's say, as where I worked in East Baltimore, most people, well, first of all, most of the buildings are vacant or lots abandoned, but of the buildings where people live, still most people are getting up and going to work in the morning. What would I want me to do if I was one of those people? And often my answer was just shut the people up who are selling drugs. It wasn't that I took the war on drugs personally. At some level, I'm opposed to it, but there's quality of life issues that are involved here. The drug dealers are, in essence, having a party. They're with their friends. They're drinking, they're smoking, they're playing music, they're having a good time. And
making some money.
I'm sorry?
Making some money.
Making some money. And that was the part that I could control, was yes, I could lock people up for drugs. I knew that in a way that was futile, though you still had to do it sometimes to show your lawful authority, because the goal is to get people to obey you. And generally there was this, I'd pull up on a drug corner and they'd walk around the block. Okay, is that long-term the best solution? Probably not. But for the short term, it's okay. That ended after Freddie Gray died in a police van and the police stopped policing drug corners, and violence skyrocketed. because there is that nexus between open air public drug dealing and violence. But it's the violence that I want to talk. That was the other thing that surprised me, and I think people who don't go to those neighborhoods, have no reason to, are afraid to go there, don't understand the trauma of violence. And I see this in a lot of progressive politicians in New York City running for mayor, where they discount, in the name of progressive, anti-racist something or other, they're literally ignoring the voices of black and brown communities that want more policing. And it's shameful, I think. And usually those loudest voices, not always, but usually those loudest voices are coming from neighborhoods with relatively low crime, like mine in Astoria, represented by a known police abolitionist. And it'd be one thing if she just imposed her vision on the people who vote for her in the Democratic primary, but whatever. She represents the community. Not enough people vote. But she imposes that on others. So what is your vision for New York City policing and public safety, and how is it different from there are going to be three things. You can answer them in any order. How is it different from the other people running for mayor? And how do you get your voice out in a low turnout Democratic primary election?
Well, those are some very different questions. Let me see if I can address them. I'll answer the last one first. It's sort of the shortest. I got into this race knowing it was a very narrow lane for an outsider, call it running in the Mike Bloomberg lane, but without $73 million of my own money to drop buying name recognition, starting with 0% name recognition. I did just get a couple million of city matching funds. There's 32 days to the primary day. So we've just launched a major digital campaign to get my name out there and all, but I can read the polls as well as everybody else. Cuomo is far ahead in the polls, well above, any polling error. But we still have two debates. I've qualified for both of them, June 4th and June 12th, that will be aired on live television, NY1 and WABC, I think. So things can change. Just ask Mayor Yang. I came into this race with the approach that Charlie Munger once said, who's one of my investing heroes, said the key to a successful marriage is low expectations going in. So I was realistic and open-eyed getting into this race, but have in total, from the money I raise and the matching money, we'll have over $3 million to run a respectable campaign and get the word out there as a voice, a pro-business voice, pro-education reform, charter schools. I'm the only candidate in the field who's not pandering to the teachers union, trying to get their endorsement. And the issue we're talking about here, sort of being a law and order candidate.
You said you would make crime illegal again.
Yes, that was sort of a little punchy line that I used that causes some of the other candidates on the debate stage to spit up their coffee when I use it. But I don't need to tell you, but for those in your audience may not be familiar, when a series of things happened, but when the New York Democrats flipped the New York State Senate, we became a one-party state. A bunch of legislation passed, some of which I supported, but it went too far, from bail reform to discovery reform. Breaks my heart to see Raise the Age, where New York finally fixed its unjust system, whereas treating 16 and 17-year-olds as adults in the criminal justice system. You don't want to put 16 and 17-year-olds at Rikers generally with older, more hardened criminals. On the other hand, you need to fund diversion programs. You don't want to let young people who have been drawn into gangs, for example. You don't want to create a revolving door where there are no consequences. They're right back out onto the streets, even if they're carrying a gun or something, because that is, in fact, what has happened. And the gangs now recognize this, so they're recruiting younger people to carry guns and do shootings and so forth, because there's far fewer consequences. So you're actually, in fact, by passing correct legislation but not funding it properly, you're harming the very youth you are trying to help. So this is sort of exhibit A of many examples I could cite of good intentions run amok. I would cite bail reform went too far. How did we pass bail reform? Restrict, almost eliminate bail, but not give judges dangerousness. Discovery reform.
Can I answer that quickly? Because I think I have it's important because I am critical of many of the things, as are you, and I also, as I think you said, it's not, these laws aren't all bad, and they corrected some past wrongs. But the fact that the advocates who push for these laws don't want to tinker with them and don't want to improve them, they're using it purely as a ratchet to achieve jail abolition. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. But I think that's important to recognize because many of them aren't operating in good faith, by which I mean they want to make the best possible law. No, they want to have a world in which there's no consequences for crime, there's no jail for criminals, and police are purely in a reactive mode. I don't know if you buy that or not. But
I have encountered I co-chaired Central Synagogue's Criminal Justice Reform Initiative starting about 10 years ago. So I've interacted with many of the folks you're talking about. We were part of the Criminal Justice Reform Coalition of faith-based institutions, places like the Vera Institute, et cetera. And there are and public defenders, and particularly the latter among public defenders. I would agree with your assessment that a lot of them think all incarceration is bad. They refer to it as caging humans. And I was like, no, it's locking up bad people and keeping them from harming the vast majority of the rest of us, law-abiding citizens, right? I will say, though, that it was very easy for even well-intentioned, sensible people to get seduced into for example, the notorious case of Khalif Browder, and thinking that Rikers Island is full of Khalif Browders. And he was, for again, those folks listening or watching here, very briefly, was a young man who apparently punched someone and took his backpack. A relatively minor crime, but his case ended up taking much too long. He was in Rikers for like 2 or 3 years. His family was poor, so it was a relatively small amount of bail. He was beaten, traumatized. By the time he finally got out, he was so damaged he ended up committing suicide. And that case, it was written up in one of the major, I forget whether it's the Atlantic or Vanity Fair or something like that, and he became an national cause celeb, and was the poster child for a criminal justice system that, in terms of youth incarceration, that was putting people in Rikers who really shouldn't have been there, with problems with the bail system, et cetera. And again, this was a terrible case, a tragic case, and the system really failed there. But the idea that this has led, for example, to the Closed Rikers initiative, which the city council actually passed into law, and it's going to be a disaster if they actually carry it out. Now, I don't think they will, but the idea is to shut down Rikers entirely. It's supposed to happen by August 2027. No, everybody agrees it's not going to happen by then, because the 4 borough-based jails are not surprisingly taking twice the amount of time and costing twice as much. I mean, literally $16 billion to build 4 borough-based facilities that only have 4,000 beds. The problem is there's 7,500 people at Rikers right now. And so the question is, let's say,
historically low.
Yeah. In a city of 8.5 million people, I don't think you're going to be able to get down to 4,000 beds, even if you do speed up the courts and other things that need to happen. And so if I confidently predict we will not shutter Rikers. It's an abomination. I'm glad it was taken over, put into receivership just a few days ago. But I think Rikers needs to be shrunk, and the physical facilities that remain for a smaller Rikers need to be rebuilt. Rikers, in fact, is, I believe, 8 different facilities right now. All of them.
More, but maybe they closed some of them. But yeah,
it's either 10 or 8. I've heard 2 different numbers depending on how you count. Like one of them, for example, is only for women. They have different types of prisoners there. But if you shrink Rikers down to 3 newly rebuilt facilities, and in fact, the physical infrastructure is one of the things that makes it so dangerous and terrible today, and also newer design. For example, there are areas at Rikers where are not visible by cameras and all, where bad things can be going on and the guards can't see it on the videos, right? So new jails require far lower staffing levels, are far more secure. So the new borough-based jails should be a lot safer. But you're going to have to keep Rikers open. And in fact, Rikers is a fabulous place to put a jail. It's out on an island in the middle of the river. There are there's no NIMBYism. There's no residential issues. I think we should have 5 borough-based jails, which would include a newly rebuilt Rikers.
It's also under, it's right by LaGuardia, which I'm sure sucks if you're on Rikers, but it's not like ideal residential housing because you can't be high and it's loud. The original closed Rikers plan from the Judge Lippman Commission, I was supportive of. The cost saving was going to come through better design, which would have reduced the number of correctional officers by half, which, like policing, the cost of jails is 90+% labor. And so if you can have fewer number of COs doing the same job, you save a lot of money. Bail reform was part of the plan to reduce the jail population. The number was probably always, I don't think New York can get by without fewer than roughly 7,000 beds, what we have now. And that's always going to, that's a huge issue. But I changed on when what was interesting is that there was vast support for this original plan, but then of course neighborhoods opposed the building of jails. Staten Island, got out of theirs. But then no one expected to be outflanked from the left, and then there became a no new jails, close Rikers coalition, and I first sort of took them seriously, and I said, okay, I may disagree, but so when somebody stabs somebody, what do we do with that person tonight? And I thought there was going to be an answer. Like, this is not a surprise question. And I would get blank faces or no response. And then I realized, these aren't serious adults. They don't have a plan. They're just chanting ideological slogans. Unfortunately, I think it's a large part now of the New York City Democratic elected leaders.
Yes, and I would actually say, coming back to what we were talking about earlier about stop and frisk, this has been a real hand grenade at some of the mayoral forums, where a number of the candidates that on the debate stage with me in the Democratic primary have experienced what they felt were unlawful stops or police abuse. So they're really quite emotional about it, and just to put some facts around this, stop and frisk at its peak in 2011, there were 585,000 stop and frisks that year. It dropped
slightly higher, but that's only because this is my.
Or is it 685?
Yeah, 685.
685.
I
Thank you.
The numbers pretty quickly here. Yeah.
It dropped 98% to 12,000 2 years ago, and it's doubled since then to about 25,000. And so it's still down 96%. I think as much as you and I are sort of law and order, and police can use reasonable suspicion or whatever, it was out of control back at the peak. I blame Bloomberg
and Kelly for that. It was not productive. Shootings were not going down as stops were going up.
Yes.
And my students were getting stopped coming to school, and they would say, "Why aren't they stopping the drug dealers?"
It was abusive. It was counterproductive. It alienated the communities you were trying to protect, etc. But when it drops, so now we're down 96% from that level. And
what was it last year? Did you say? I don't have that on my little spreadsheet.
The last 3 years ago, it bottomed at 12,000, I believe, and last year is 24,000.
I'll punch that.
So under Mayor Adams, it's gone up, and it wouldn't surprise me if it's gone up somewhat more since Jessica Tisch came in, as she has put more police officers out on the streets. The number of arrests, I think, this year for lower level crimes that previously weren't enforced at all, hence my phrase, make crime illegal again. Open air drug use, for example, are up substantially this year. Miscellaneous misdemeanors or arrests for that are up quite a bit this year. And actually, Rikers' population's gone from 6,800 to 7,500 or so this year. as the police are starting to arrest for lower level, some of them you could call quality of life crimes, but clearly crimes. But the benefit of this has been murders are down 28% year to date, shootings are down 16%, transit crime down 6 or 7%. Most of the major crimes after 3 years of increasing, the first 3 years under Mayor Adams, if you X out the pandemic as being sort of an unusual event that caused some weird things when everybody was locked down. Other than murders, other major felonies and most misdemeanors were up the last 3 years, contrary to what Mayor Adams has been telling people. But the good news is across the board this year, both felonies and misdemeanors are down, in many cases, double digits. And I believe the primary reason for that is better the NYPD is being run better by a more effective commissioner, better manager, and they're doing a number of smart things. Flooding the zone is what she calls it. Putting more police officers in the high crime hotspots, and a quality of life initiative, enforcing quality of life crimes, etc.
Also, she's not a corrupt criminal. That really does matter at the leadership level.
Yes, I have to imagine you're probably much closer than I am. The morale among police officers is quite a bit higher now that they're not being led by people who got their jobs from being cronies and obviously corrupt and well known to be corrupt.
As far as I know, Jessica Tisch does not have an identical twin sister who is going around shaking down businesses as the former Commissioner Caban brother did with a police unit. I mean, it was horrible corruption at the top, and it's mostly gone. There's still a couple problem people working for the mayor, but within the police department, the mayor's direct flunkies are largely out of the picture. And I mean, it's a shame, and all I want is, for years we had good leadership, and even with my complaints about Kelly and Stop, Question, and Frisk, there was no question that the upper ranks were not criminally corrupt. Now I'm just happy to have somebody in there who achieves that level. I don't think Tish is loved, but she's certainly loved more than the previous ones. I also remember cops complain all the time. That's the other thing. They never really liked the commissioner, except perhaps for the first term of Bill Bratton back in the 90s. I wanted to ask you a few other things. I want to just comment on one thing about the stops. There's a bit of nuance because every time police stops go up, crime seems to go down, and it's not a coincidence. But it's not simply that.
Except back at the peak, you pointed out back in 2011, where it went way too far. Because
we can't measure. Policing as a verb is hard to quantify, and so I look into things like misdemeanor arrests and C summons, criminal citations, and violations, not because those are good for themselves, and if you tell cops to produce them, they can do it, but it has to be goal focused. And when cops are actually being proactive, when they are interacting with criminals, and of course, not everyone will be a criminal. I mean, there is that. Yes, cops also do stop innocent people, and that's why demeanor and professionalism is important. But when cops are actually policing, those indicators will go up. And so it's not so much like, oh my God, they get an open container site, summonses or whatever. Is that they're choosing to work when they don't have to, because it is easy to do nothing. You won't, and there's a cliche. Well, it's true. There's a reason it's a cliche, or is it a trope? I don't know. But if you don't work, you can't get in trouble. And that is a real problem in the police world, where you do have a lot of job security, and at some point you have to want to do your job and be supported in that politically. But absolutely, when you see these minor things go up, it's a sign the police are getting back in the game. But then the police department has to be smart enough and say, it's not just that we want, a lot of these summonses for their own sake. Does it reduce violence? Are we going after the people who we know are violent criminals? And that's what good leadership is about. But it is good news that shootings and murders are down, not quite to where they were back in 2017 and 2018.
Right.
When things were at their best, and then we decided everything was so bad we had to tear the system down. But they are trending in the right direction. Let me ask you, there are a couple other things I want to get to before we'll run out of time. What do we do now with Sanctuary City, ICE, and I mean, I don't know. You can kind of read the question into that. I could elaborate more, but what's your take on what's going on?
Yeah, it's a tough one because the Trump administration has been acting so lawlessly, and in so many cases. I don't need to elaborate here. I think as part of many areas that went too far, the city council passed enhanced Sanctuary City in 2014, 2018, for example, that shut down the ICE office at Rikers. And I think there should be cooperation between city, state, and federal authorities, and that the computers should be talking to each other, so that if someone is stopped for a broken taillight and it turns out they're wanted for a crime in another state or another country, or they're on the terrorist watch list, etc., that a relatively benign stop where normally someone would just be released, that person could be arrested, and if they're not in this country legally, they don't need to necessarily be convicted. There needs to be some due process and all, but this standard, everyone says, they have to be convicted. Well, of course, nobody's ever going to take a plea bargain. This can take years. And if someone's a Venezuelan migrant gang member, like the one who assaulted Alvin Bragg's ADA, and it was his 7th arrest last year, I think there should be a relatively quick process to send them back to Venezuela.
Yeah, I just want to repeat, it's so important to repeat. Yes, we do need due process. It is the basis of civil and civilized society, and I'm scared right now about what's going on. But due process does not mean necessarily a criminal conviction. If you're arrested on probable cause, that's part of it. But I want to make sure, A, you are the person we think you are. That you're also not going to be sent to the El Salvadoran gulag for no good reason.
Yes.
Well, let me strike for no good reason. You're not going to be sent there. But the idea but deportation, if you have the right person and you're looking for them, that's due process. It's a different level. Yeah, it does not have to be till adjudication of your criminal case.
Yes, but I get in a lot of trouble for that, and people, other candidates screaming, that's against the Constitution. And I was like, when I said, I don't think New York City should necessarily, if New York City catches someone has good reason to believe, or they have been arrested, they're caught on tape, assaulting Alvin Bragg's ADA, turn them over to the feds, and the response, I guess, that's unconstitutional. And I was like, no, it's not. It doesn't someone getting due process doesn't mean that we, New York City, have to give them due process. The problem, though, is that I have no confidence that the Trump administration will follow the law in any way. And so, at this point, I can't in good conscience say we should do what we normally would do as a city in cooperating with the feds, that we can do that under this administration that's just proven to be so lawless. So it creates a conundrum for me, I would say. I generally speaking think there should be an ICE presence on Rikers so that we as a city have the option of turning someone over to the feds rather than giving them due process at the city level and incurring the $500,000 a year it costs to incarcerate somebody at Rikers. On the other hand, I can't in good conscience say I'd open up an ICE office at Rikers given the behavior of the ICE under the Trump administration.
I can't help but feel that if Democrats in New York City had better handled this in the past, maybe it would not have changed the national election. We didn't vote for Trump, but we left a vacuum and a void in lowercase law and order and public safety.
Yes.
And I warn, there's no point in saying I told you so, but I warn this fear. It will be filled by MAGA and Trumpers.
Yes.
Because we don't seem to care about criminals. And notice, neighborhoods, when violent criminals are released, they go into neighborhoods surrounded by, when violent criminals who are immigrants, documented or not, they're going into other immigrant neighborhoods who they are terrorizing. We have to think about them too. The fact that the neighborhood of Corona, which for people who don't live in New York is a heavily Hispanic, poor immigrant neighborhood not far from me in Queens, voted for Trump.
Yeah.
I imagine some of them regret that today. But my God, how screwed up did we have to be to reach that point where we're losing the votes of working class Hispanic
Right.
New Yorkers?
I mean, citywide, Trump's share of the vote in the last three elections has gone from 17 to 23 to 30%. So it's almost doubled. And I do think, the sense that Democrats went too far and were more concerned about the rights of criminals than the rights of law-abiding people, the rise in crime that we saw. And some of that was pandemic driven. Certainly wasn't Democrats' fault, but it's, unfortunately, right about the time the pandemic hit is, for example, bail reform went into effect on January 1st of 2020. And an awful lot of people who would have been jailed across the state. I mean, I've heard a number as high as 100,000 people were instead not jailed pre-trial. And I might be okay with that if judges had discretion to evaluate whether they posed a danger in releasing them. But the law didn't allow that.
And people outside of New York State may not believe this, and people inside of New York State may not know it. But so New York is the only state that does not allow a judge to hold someone post-arrest, pre-trial, because they are dangerous.
Yes.
And that is no accident. That's what the advocates wanted, and they got that into. And now that part has always been part of New York, but there were workarounds, and they closed every workaround. So the judge could say, "I know you're dangerous, and I still have to release you." It is absurd, and this is why Republicans are winning elections,
yes.
At least on public safety issues.
Yes. So this is one of I entered this race. Knowing there's a narrow lane for an outsider in a sort of a rigged primary that's off year, off season, closed to only Democrats, but being a voice for saying things on the debate stage that nobody else will say because I don't care. I'm not a career politician. I don't need. I'm not angling for a future job, and. Sort of speaking politically incorrect truths. I have the liberty to do so.
Some might say
so in the area of crime, in the area of education reform, and being a pro-business candidate, a candidate who says, the words real estate developer is not a pejorative. Those are not three pejorative words. They are people willing to invest to make money by building housing in New York is something we need to celebrate and attract. That's another area where I'm the only guy on the debate stage saying that.
I don't know if you want to go negative or stay positive. You can answer this in different ways. Either tell me why I shouldn't be voting for Cuomo or Mandami, or could you tell me maybe who you're going to rank order after yourself?
I haven't decided. In fact, not one other candidate has said, who they will rank, second to them. There is the Working Families Party, which is Adams, Zellner, Myrie. This is Adrian Adams, Zellner, Myrie, Zohran Mamdani, and Brad Lander. So they're sort of cross-endorsing sort of the lefty folks trying to beat Cuomo. So your answer. Is policy-wise, I'm most similarly aligned to Cuomo, and so many people may rank the two of us and nobody else. Mamdani is the complete opposite spectrum. He is polling second, though far behind Cuomo, because he's the only one of the sort of lefty candidates who isn't tacking to the center and trying to disavow his prior positions. And, he's trying to sort of be clever in disavowing his anti-Israel rhetoric. I'm not quite sure I would say he is anti-Semitic, but he sure hobnobs with a lot of them and has been a leader of the protests against Israel, which have often devolved into violence and just rank anti-Semitism. And, as we saw earlier this week, murder down in D.C. And I've called him out for he should not be using rhetoric like accusing Israel of genocide, which he has done. But I also think he's a hardcore democratic socialist. he is one of the few candidates who does not recognize that at a 34-year low in the number of police officers today, we need to hire more police officers. He instead is going to set up this Department of Community Safety, which is a bunch of nonsense.
It's like NYC Thrive, but for public safety.
Yeah, he would be. Yeah, exactly. He would be terrible for public safety. He would be terrible for our economy. He's openly wants to raise taxes all over the place to pay for free everything, and like the democratic socialist that he is. So I have been going strongly against Mamdani.
You have money and are willing to pay taxes and even more taxes. Is that what the patriotic millionaires is about?
Yes. At the national level, I think, we have to be very, very careful at the New York State and city level, where we're already among the highest or the very highest, depending on how you calculate it, tax rates in the country. We've, and have been driving people and businesses out of our city and state. But at the national level, I've called for an alternative minimum tax such that the very, very wealthiest people would have a minimum tax. They're currently paying far lower taxes than average working folks, closing the carried interest loophole that benefits people in the hedge fund and private equity industry. I'm very familiar with that one. So yeah, I'm a Democrat, and by the way, this Doge that's supposed to save us all this money. The problem is that idiot Elon Musk has been slashing the IRS, and the estimates I've seen, he's now down to 170 billion in savings, maybe, with his Doge. But the problem is the cuts at the IRS are going to result in $400 billion of fewer taxes being paid, because there'll just be more tax evasion because the IRS won't have the people to correctly audit, and there's plenty of fraud out there. And people evading taxes, and you need a strong, well-staffed IRS to collect the revenues that we're all owed, because otherwise you and I and average folks are going to end up paying what the wealthy tax cheats are avoiding. So it's madness what's going on there.
I suspect you're in a higher tax bracket than me. I don't know that, but I suspect you are.
I am now. But for much of my hedge fund career, I was not. In fact, I went down to the White House and stood behind Barack Obama when he called for something called the Buffett rule, which was a minimum tax, because, and I went down with my secretary, because when you added in the payroll taxes that are highly regressive, I'm talking FICA, Social Security and Medicare taxes. She was, and the fact that I was running a hedge fund, which meant as long as I didn't sell any stocks, my wealth was going up a lot, but they weren't realized capital gains on my stock positions going up. And when I was taxed on what my investors were paying me, again, this is what's called the carried interest loophole. The share of the profits that I earned from the money I made for my investors, I, like most funds, took 20% of the profits each year, which could add up to, for the big funds, hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars a year. I was running a pretty small fund, so it was much smaller amounts. But the point is it was taxed at a much lower capital gains, not an income tax rate. That's the loophole. So I went down and fought against that because I was paying half the tax rate of my secretary.
I've always wondered what that meant. That was a good explanation. Well explained. That's really all I got. I don't know. So Cuomo, what bothers me is first of all, everyone should put down 5 candidates. You don't have to like somebody you're ranking. It just means you dislike them less than somebody else.
Right. By the way, I would argue against that. If you are a hardcore lefty, you should only rank maybe 3 or 4 lefties. And if you are very concerned, as I am, about the far left, you should rank Cuomo and me, and I'm not sure anybody else. Zellner Myrie has impressed me. He's
what about the fact that Cuomo is a vile human being?
But you do not. I would argue you do not want to rank Mamdani anywhere, because here's the thing: those may seem like, if I rank someone 4th or 5th, that's not going to make a difference. But if the candidates that you've ranked higher the way ranked choice voting works is it could carry Mamdani over the line in a low turnout, very lefty primary.
Well, that's why I'm saying you should put somebody above the person you hate most, even if you don't like that person. How many are on the ballot? Do you know?
I believe it's 9 qualified for the ballot, but there's Paperboy Prince, and a couple other people like literally who haven't raised $1,000. But there are 7 serious candidates. I think 6 of us have qualified for city matching money, which is a minimum of $2 million. I think 5 of us have qualified. I expect Adrienne Adams will qualify. I expect Jessica Ramos, who's a very serious candidate. She's a state senator, but I'm not sure whether she will qualify for city matching money.
But the reason I say you still have to fill out all 5, if the election comes down between Mamdani and Ramos, I got to pick one of them. And I might actually pick Mamdani over Ramos. Though I also
the most likely scenario at this point, according to the polls, is Cuomo on one side, and then Mamdani and Lander are polling. You could imagine if Adrienne Adams gets matching money, she's done well in a couple of polls. I could imagine someone ranking, in a more centrist ranking. I would hope me first and Cuomo second. But then, Myrie, Adams, Lander, or Stringer or something, just don't, even if it's your 5th vote, just don't list Mamdani, in my view. I
also wish he would retire. I'm his constituent, and I've made efforts to talk to him, and I get no reply, which irks me a bit. At least he should reply as...
I'm surprised, but not surprised, in the sense that, given sort of what you've written in your views on policing and so forth, he's going to be in a very different and much worse place, in my opinion. Though I also will credit him. He is very charming. And he has shown a willingness, for example, to go speak to Jewish groups, speak at a synagogue and all, even though he is widely perceived, I believe correctly, to be hostile to Israel and debatably, anti-Semitic and whipping up the anti-Israel crowd in a way that's very reckless and dangerous. But he has gone and spoken to Jewish groups, but there may be a difference there. Jews are 12% of New York City's population, and probably double that off the top of my head in terms of Democratic primary voters. So he has to take the risk and go into see these groups that may be hostile to him, where he doesn't have to take any risk to go to talk to you. No disrespect, right?
Right. But I am in his district. I will say he's charismatic. His outreach is good. But I think his policies would be a disaster. All right, let me wrap up. Let me lob you what I hope is a softball question. But what do you love most about New York City?
It's just incredible diversity, and I've always appreciated it. But I've really running for mayor and going out and speaking at so many mayoral forums and small businesses, and going out to sort of every neighborhood in the city. It's astoundingly diverse, the vibrancy, and so much of that is due to immigrants. And it's really makes me, I'm so much more optimistic about New York City than I was when I entered the race 6 months ago. I don't think city government's being run very well. I think we've got a broken democracy where our politicians are beholden to all the special interests, not really to all the voters of New York. But nevertheless, it's just an incredibly vibrant city. We have incredible people and assets, and we just need to make sure that we're maximizing our potential, which we're falling short of our potential, both as a city and I'd argue as a state and a country and the country. But I'm going to try and fix that at the city level.
Well, you knocked that one out of the park. I just want to second that as a professor at CUNY School, John Jay College. I don't know how any professor at a public university here could not have more faith in New York, given when you see the students and where they come from and how they're striving, and both the obstacles they're facing and how much they achieve. I mean, it's hokey, but there is something inspiring about that. And I always leave class sort of happier than I go into class, and it's because it's filled with New Yorkers.
Yeah, and by the way, I highly recommend, if you haven't seen it, the new documentary, Drop Dead City.
It's on my every day. I say I'm going to see it. It's playing another week. I will see it. I know it's. I've heard fabulous things about it from a lot of people.
Yeah, I just rode my bike down there and just went and saw it one day by myself. Wasn't a campaign event or anything like that, but
it's at the IFC Center at West 4th Street.
Yes, yeah, I did not live in the city. This took place. It tracks 3 to 6 month period, really, in 1975, when the city came literally within an hour of filing for bankruptcy. And the title of the documentary refers to the famous Daily News headline, "Ford to New York, drop dead," which he didn't actually say, but President Ford at the time said, "We will not participate in any bailout of New York City." And it was critical that the feds participate and backstop bond offering, et cetera. But it tracks what was happening in Albany. It actually, Al Shanker, head of the teachers union here in the city at that time, sort of a legendary figure, was the key last holdout. But seeing what New York City was like back then, I mean, we have our issues today, but we are not on the verge of bankruptcy. The city today is so much, safer, cleaner, et cetera. Looking back at all the archival footage and how bad things got in New York and Bronx, the whole Bronx is burning, and just block after block, mile after mile of just burnt out buildings and rubble.
That's why I start my book about the crime drop in that era, because
yes,
you have to understand how dysfunctional the city was.
Yes. I mean, interestingly, murders peaked in 92, right? So, this movie is 90 or 92? 90, I guess, right?
Yeah, it was 90 with
2,500 or something. We're down to 400 today. Say it again?
2,262 in 1990.
Correct. So interestingly, the city, for 15 years after the bailout, at least in terms of the murder rate, continued downward. But, since then, the 35 years since then, the city has, and I moved to the city in 94. The city has really recovered. And so the movie really helped me put things in perspective, as unsafe as we may feel things are. And, people not feeling safe riding the subway, and, there's scary headlines and all. We're in a massively better place. 5% of U.S. GDP is generated right here in New York City. We have the most incredible museums, culture, arts, the vibrancy. We built off the financial sector. We've lost most of our manufacturing base, but the vibrancy of the tech sector here, the attraction of talent is here, and Google's East Coast headquarters, Facebook's East Coast headquarters are all here, rightly so, because the human talent being the center of the universe. It's absolute madness that we drove Jeff Bezos and Amazon out of here. AOC pretty much single-handedly did that.
I disagree with that. Living in that neighborhood, I'm not. It was the tax breaks. We didn't have to pay so much for it. There were also, if you look at what they've done in Virginia, they had none of those jobs they promised haven't really come to fruition. But that is going to have to wait. We've been on this for an hour.
Yes.
That's water under the bridge. I'd love to, perhaps sometimes.
Yeah.
I want to.
By the way, I just posted in the chat, but for your readers, I just wanted to get the numbers correct in terms of stop and frisk by year. Peaked at 685,724 in 2011. We had that right. It actually, the low was right at the end of de Blasio, 2021, bottomed at 9,000. Went to 15 and 17,000 first 2 years of Adams, and I was almost correct. 25,386. I
had the numbers in front of me. You were close enough.
Yeah, pretty close.
Not
but
expected to know that off the top of your head.
In the last 3 years, stop and frisks have almost tripled, but are still down 96% from their peak.
Also, not everyone who stopped is frisked, by the way. So
correct. It's interesting. Depending on the search here, I just pulled this off of ChatGPT. There's a very big difference between a stop and a frisk. There's a different standard there, of course, and when someone is frisked, that's much more invasive. and alienates the person being frisked, assuming they haven't done anything wrong, as opposed to simply being stopped. Police are allowed to stop and make conversation with people. Hey, what are you doing? Whatever. It's actually, again, this completely gets lost on the nuance, gets lost on the debate stage. But there's sort of there are 5 sort of levels of engagement prior to arrest, for example. The first being, the police are allowed to make conversation with anybody going by, but then to actually stop someone is, and the person being questioned may not recognize that there's a difference, whether, cops just making conversation, checking them out a little bit. Hey, what's up? Versus an official stop where there needs to be reasonable suspicion. But then to actually frisk somebody,
can I ask you, would you, if you are mayor, would you work to rescind the Count the Stops bill that passed, which is kind of getting into the weeds? I don't know if
this is the one that requires all sorts of paperwork for every stop.
Well, yes, but it's not. It's beneath the level of a stop. It's for any question. It's for any interaction that could potentially be crime related. Yeah. It means that if someone is stabbed on the subway and a cop goes in and shouts, "Did anybody see anything?" In theory, he or she is supposed to ask everybody, fill out a form for everybody on that subway car.
Yeah, obviously that's insanity. But
it passes City Hall.
Yeah, I know. Well, the absolute craziest thing that came very close to passing just a few weeks ago was unplugging the gang database. I can't think of a worse idea. The NYPD has spent, decades. I
was on the Brian Lehrer show talking about that last week, and it felt almost like it entered a bizarro world where this is because there are 2 things. Reasonable people can talk about improving or restricting the gang database list. Yeah. And that should be done. The bill doesn't do that. The bill prevents cops from keeping lists of criminals.
But worse yet, it requires the unplugging and erasure of the existing database.
And no established. Now, it says also you can't establish a future one. This would include terrorists, white supremacists, corrupt cops. Even if the bill were good in theory, which it is not, in my opinion, in practice, that bill would be catastrophic. And if Adrian Adams and if a lot of these candidates win, I think they need one more vote in City Council.
I know. I know.
It would be a disaster.
Absolute disaster. I can't think of a worse idea. Similarly. Closing Rikers entirely when there aren't enough beds, if there aren't enough cells for people. This is if you wanted to double crime in New York City overnight, close Rikers and unplug the gang database. And that's what a lot of people on stage with me, a lot of the candidates in the race would do.
And we did see violence double when we released, because of COVID reasons, when we released a lot of prisoners from Rikers violent. Because it's not it doesn't happen in a vacuum. People actually commit the crimes. Sir, this has been a pleasure. Let's wrap up, and I will try and get this out there probably tomorrow. And thank you for finding the time to speak to me. Any other mayoral candidates out there, reach out to me, and I'll gladly interview you in the same format.
All right. Great talking to you, Peter. Thank you for having me.
Likewise, a pleasure. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
I'm Peter Moskos, and this has been Quality Policing. Thank you for listening or watching on YouTube. And I was here today with Whitney Tilson, who is running for the running in the Democratic primary for the position of the mayor of the city of New York. Thanks again. Bye-bye.